Today for social studies is Unit 3, Lesson 11, Generalized, which we looked at already in our nonfiction language art. So it's going to be something that's familiar to you, and just approaching it now from the idea of social studies, and a little bit of a refresher. So by the time we complete this lesson, we're going to be able to draw conclusions by making a generalization and use valid information to support a generalization. Let's see here.
I can do that.
Okay. All right, let's get to our audio here.
When you generalize, you make a broad statement that applies to entire groups of people, places, events, and so on. These statements typically contain words such as usually, all, everyone, many, few, often, or overall. Generalizing is useful when drawing a conclusion about something. For example, one might make the following generalization.
Right.
Most Americans believe in the principles of democracy. However, before you make a generalization, be sure that the information you use to support it is valid. As with other areas of the GED test, questions about generalizing will test your ability to interpret information at various depth of knowledge levels through the use of complex reading skills and thinking skills.
All right. And I think what's important about a lesson on generalizing is, at least for me, learning when not to do it as much as when to do it, when it's appropriate to use a generalization, because you have to be very careful. This is one of those things you want to make sure that your evidence supports, typically you want to, when you're writing, to speak or write with some accuracy, some precision, with your evidence and things like that. So you want to minimize the amount of generalization that you use. And when you do use it, make sure that it's, it really speaks to your point. And you remember during our nonfiction generalization lesson, you talking about, specific types of generalization like stereotypes. You don't want to fall into using a stereotype and things like that. So again, the other thing about generalizing too is working on your critical thinking skills. So making sure that you spot it and you can stop and think about when somebody uses a generalization, if that is also the way they're using it is correct and that their generalization is supported by evidence. And just like before, we look for those signal words. So all, everyone, most, many, few, often, overall, generally speaking. When you hear those terms, you want to, say, hey, let's pump the brakes here. Let's see if this actually follows through, if this generalization is accurate. All right, so we'll think about that as we go along here. And our first passage here is from Shaping America's Global Energy Policy. It's from the Bureau of Energy Resources, U.S. Department of State. And the question is asking is, why a Bureau of Energy Resources? So it says the world runs on energy and people need affordable, reliable, and sustainable energy supplies. Energy provides for our most basic needs and fuels the technologies that can secure our futures. But over 1 billion of the world's people still do not have access to electricity. If we ignore their needs, we entrench their poverty. If we expand their access to energy without making it sustainable, we accelerate environmental impacts and the competition for scarce resources. The department is charged with shaping U.S. international energy engagement, influencing how nations move to a cleaner energy future, and protecting our energy infrastructure and transit routes. This effort requires strong diplomatic relationships with major consumers and suppliers. We must anticipate changes in energy markets and work with international organizations to stabilize markets and build capacity to manage them. investments in secure, expanding, and ever cleaner sources of energy will translate into improved health, greater economic sustainability, safer living environments, and enhanced U.S. national security. I want to point something out here too. We talked yesterday about evidence, right? And evaluating sources. This comes from state.gov. So that is the official website of the U.S. Department of State. So that's the department that handles foreign policy. You know, it's our foreign relations, the Secretary of State, you know, sort of like our first diplomat. They handle like all our embassies and stuff like that. So you can think a little bit if there's some bias in here, if it's coming from the State Department and they're sort of promoting this idea of clean energy. It's also, take note of when this was accessed. So this was in 2013. Who was president then? That was Barack Obama. So we had a more of a push towards, you know, clean energy and things like that during that administration. So a little bias might be wrapped in here as far as promoting an idea of clean energy. Just, you know, kind of expanding that critical thinking. And so our text boxes, what it says up here, we look closely at ideas to see how they are connected. Here, the writer connects access to electricity to poverty. So generalizing that, you know, there's over 1 billion of the world's people still do not have access to electricity. If we ignore their needs, we enrich their poverty. Bringing them electricity can help lift them out of poverty. And that's sort of a generalization there.
Okay,
And then secondly, it says examine the text to find facts or evidence, and author includes that will support a generalization or generalizations. So thinking about these initiatives, so investments in secure, expanding, and ever cleaner sources of energy will translate into improved health, greater economic sustainability, safer living environments, and enhanced U.S. national security. That's all sort of generally speaking to improve these situations. Okay. All right, so let's move over to our quiz. Okay, and our first question, let's start with Tracy. Could you read question 1 for us?
Yes. Which of the following generalizations is supported by the excerpt? A. Most countries generally produce cleaner energy than the United States. B. Safe living environments are only available to those with electricity. C. People without access to electricity typically live in poverty. D. The Bureau of Energy Resources works mainly in fossil fuel energy.
Try thinking about the theme there. What was that? C. Yeah, C is in cat, right? That's sort of the theme of that piece, what we're reading. The argument there is that people generally without access to electricity typically live in poverty. So that's a generalization. Right. So 1 is C. And a new passage here. Let's see, Grace, could you read maybe the first 2 paragraphs for us?
Okay. From who can declare war? The New York Times, December 15, 1990. According to the Bush administration, the fact that the Constitution gives Congress and only Congress the power to declare war doesn't stop the president from starting a war on his own. Congress might have interesting opinions, and its support is desirable, the argument goes, but its approval is not required should the president decide to attack Iraq, even if the attack is in the administration's phrase, sudden, massive, and decisive. The president, as commander-in-chief, is authorized to conduct war. Aggressive presidents have managed to wage executive wars, often because Congress has been unwilling to assert its power. But those failures do not change the Constitution. Should I continue? Can you hear me?
Sorry, I was muted. Let's get Sasha Gay to finish the last two paragraphs there.
Assistant Attorney General Stuart Gerson made the boldest argument for executive power. Under the War Power Clause, he told Judge Harold Green in suit by the member of Congress, either branch can initiate war. Each branch might advance its conduct in support of belligerency ahead of the other. The president undertaking it, Congress in declaring it. The president isn't denying Congress its war declaring power, Mr. Gerson argued, going on to focus on its time, and the Constitution does not say war must be declared in advance of hostilities. Congress could thus exercise its right to declare war after the president has started it. And the question is,
go ahead.
Which of the following generalizations does the author make in the passage? A, congressional approval is not necessary for the president to declare war. B, aggressive presidents often take greater advantage of executive power. C, Congress is usually willing to declare war. D, the president may only start a war after Congress has authorized it. Is it A?
So it's B. Aggressive presidents often take greater advantage of executive power. So, thinking about generalizations, right? Thinking more about speaking to larger groups. In this case, it's only going to be a handful of presidents, but that's going to be your larger idea there, aggressive presidents. By the way, the last time we actually had a declaration of war from Congress was World War II. Every war that we have been involved with since then have been, Congress has approved, these actions and things like that. But as far as declaring war on another country, we haven't had that declaration since the World War II against Germany and Japan and the Axis of Powers. This one in particular is talking about the first Gulf War when George H.W. Bush was getting ready to, war was really imminent. There was things happening in Iraq where they had invaded Kuwait. We had forces that were all gathered up trying to prevent them from invading Saudi Arabia. So that's where this idea is. That's why at this particular time, this is appearing in the New York Times, because somebody is writing about, well, what's next? This is what's going on. Will President Bush declare war? What authority does he have, and things of that nature. So yeah, 2 is going to be B as in boy. And we have a new passage after this. So Cristiano, could you read the first paragraph?
Okay. Number 3. All 50 states have legislature made up of elected representatives who consider matters brought forth by the governor or introduced by its members to create legislation that becomes law. The legislature also approves a state budget and initiates tax legislation and articles of impeachment.
The latter is part of a system of check and balance among the three branches of government that mirrors the federal system and prevents any branch from abusing its power, except for one state, Nebraska. All states have a bi- bichemical bicameral
Bicameral.
bicameral legislature made up of two chambers, a smaller upper house and a larger lower house. Together, the two chambers make state law and fulfill other governing responsibilities. Now, Nebraska is the lone state that has just one chamber in its legislature. The smaller upper chamber is always called the Senate, and its members generally serve longer terms, usually 4 years. The larger lower chambers is most often called the House of Representatives, but some states call it oh my god. Oh, okay. My tail is about to go. Okay, but some states call it the Assembly or the House of Delegates. Its members usually serve shorter terms, often 2 years.
Okay. Yeah, and so that's from whitehouse.gov. We talked about, again, sources. So that's pretty reliable information. And it's just talking about how the state, government works a lot like the federal government. I did not know until I read this that Nebraska only has one legislative house. So and I think here in Ohio, we call it the Assembly. But it is, it does kind of mimic the federal government where there's a lower house where sort of like representatives and then there's an upper house. So it's sort of the main idea here. But I guess Nebraska just has the one, the one body. I wasn't. So let's look at number 3. Tracy, could you read question 3 for us? Tracy, could you read 3?
Yes.
Okay.
The question?
Yeah, the question.
Which of the following generalization can be made about the states? A. The states all have different systems for checks and balances. B. The states all have one chamber legislatures. C. The states all have bicameral legislature. D. The state have government that operate similar to the federal government. The state have A. The state have a different system to check and balance.
Actually, it's D. The states have governments that operate similar to the federal government. And that's, generally speaking, the way they may go about things might be a little bit different, but as far as the way they look, they're very similar to the federal government. So that's, that sort of just generally speaking, that generalization, states have governments that operate similar to the federal government. So the answer there is D as in dog for 3. And our same passage here for the last question. Grace, would you read question 4?
Okay. All 50 states have legislatures made up of elected representatives who consider matters brought forth by the governor or introduced by 8 members to create legislation that becomes law. Which of the following words indicates this is a generalization? A, all. B, consider. C, C, introduce, and D, create. A, all.
Yeah, all, right? That's your signal word there, that it's generalization, all, just like we were talking about. And again, thinking about, okay, well, is this an accurate generalization? Can we say that about state governments, that all 50 states have legislatures made up of elected representatives who consider matters brought forth by the governor or introduced by its members to create legislation? Yes, yeah, we can say that. There's evidence to support that. All 50 states have elected representatives that go to their state assembly, to their state capital, and work on whatever state issues and legislation. So that is an accurate, perfect example of a good generalization. All 50 states have legislators made up of elected representatives. So 4 is A, and that's it for the quiz. Only 4 questions today. So we'll submit. Real quick, 1 was C, as in cat. 2, B as in boy. 3, D as in dog. And 4 was A. Okay, so we'll move over to the workbook here. And once again, so a generalization is a broad statement that applies to an entire group of items. You have to make sure that it applies to that entire group of items, that doesn't exclude any. You can generalize about people, places, things, events, and so on. In order to make a valid generalization, you must be able to support your generalization with factual evidence or examples. A faulty generalization, such as all frogs are green, does not correspond to the fact that frogs have many different skin colors. That's what we're talking about here. That's why you want to limit how much you use them. You want to make sure that it speaks to an entire group when you do. And then also when you're reading and you discover generalizations, fact check them, see if, the author, or when you hear, on TV or something, you question is when you hear those words, all, most, many, few, in general, things like that, stop and say, does it really speak to the whole population or thing, place, whatever they're talking about? And that says historians may generalize about a topic, when most of the factual evidence points to one conclusion, even though exceptions may exist. So yeah, as a historian, we can't just, you don't solve history like you do math, and you can't test hypotheses like you do in science. So when we generalize about something, about history, about the study of history, we want to make sure we have just like a ton of evidence to support what we're saying. And when we make arguments, you want multiple pieces of evidence that you can, that others can verify to support those ideas. So on to the workbook. Okay, and more from whitehouse.gov. These websites are really popular these last few days for our lessons here. So here it says the executive branch conducts diplomacy with other nations, and the president has the power to negotiate and sign treaties, which also must be ratified by 2/3 of the Senate. The president can issue executive orders which direct executive officers or clarify and further existing laws. The president also has unlimited power to extend pardons and clemencies for federal crimes, except in cases of impeachment. With these powers come several responsibilities, among them a constitutional requirement to, from time to time, give to the Congress information of the state of the Union, and recommend to their consideration such measures as he shall judge necessary and expedient. Although the president may fulfill this requirement in any way he or she chooses, presidents have traditionally given a State of the Union address to a joint session of Congress each January, except in inaugural years, outlining their agenda for the coming year. So I believe we have yet to have the State of the Union address this year, but I would imagine here soon. I'm sure it's already scheduled. I could probably just go on Google and look for it. Joe Biden will go down to the Capitol building, and he'll give a speech about, different issues or different successes and things. And, typically most of the U.S. senators and House members are there, and so, like the Supreme Court justices will be there as well. So in the text box here, it says that you could use facts and information in the passage to make your own generalization. So, like the president has unlimited power to extend pardons, clemencies for federal crimes, except in cases of impeachment. So that's one of the powers that the president has. This usually comes up at the end of a president's term, where they don't get a lot of backlash for pardoning somebody. Sometimes those are very controversial, and they'll wait till the end of their term to do that. And then secondly, under the underlined part where it says, look for words that provide clues to indicate that the author is making a generalization. These clues may not always be obvious. And there is one word in here that you could look at and say, "Ooh, that might be a generalization," or they might be pointing to it. And in that first sentence, it says presidents have traditionally given a State of the Union address. That word traditionally, if something is a tradition, it means it's not a law, right? It doesn't mean they have to do it. If somebody breaks from tradition, they're changing the way something has generally been done. It's not a law, it's not set in stone. So that word right there is a bit of a generalization when you say something is a tradition or traditionally. Okay, so take a look at that. And then it says making assumptions. So a government website is a reliable source. We've talked about this. You can assume that in an informative article on that website, generalizations are valid and the information may be used to support other generalizations. So particularly when it's informative, that website's reliable. They're not going to put out information there that's false. They're going to have people that fact check it. They have professional people that are building that website and putting the information on it. It's probably historians or political scientists and things like that. So it is reliable, because if they don't, then they're going to get criticized for it, and it's not going to look good if a .gov site like that has bad information. All right. So our first question, Sasha Gay, you want to read question 1 for us?
Okay. It says presidents have traditionally given a State of the Union address to a joint session of Congress each January, except in inaugural years, outlining their agenda for the coming year. Which of the following words provide a clue that the author is making a generalization in the statement? A, traditionally, B, joint, C, each, or D, outlining? A?
Yeah, A, right? We're just talking about that. So you can sort of work backwards, and that word is qualifying that statement, right? We could eliminate that word. It says presidents have given a State of the Union address to a joint session. But we're throwing that word in there and it qualifies it. Presidents have traditionally given a State of the Union address. So that means it doesn't happen every year or every year besides an inaugural address. It's traditional. So in that case, you're like, oh, I could probably go back and look and see what years there have been a State of the Union and what years there have not. And I might have to go back and take a look, because I typically remember, every year seeing that, but obviously that is not the case. It's just traditionally it happens, not that it's expected to happen. Okay, so yeah, A for number 1. All right, and then 2, Christiana, could you read question 2?
Question 2.
It says, with which of the following president generally share many similar responsibilities. A. Representatives. B. Senators. C. Governors. D. Cabinet secretariats. B.
So C, governors. And this takes a little prior knowledge and something we talked about with state state governments, right? So they sort of mimic, they look a lot like our federal government. So you have your three branches of government, right? You have a court system at state level, you have a legislative branch, and you have an executive branch. And over the executive branch of a state government, it's the governor. And he has the same sort of powers as far as like, he vetoes like Mike DeWine here in Ohio. He can veto bills that are brought to him, and he sets an agenda, sort of like the president does, as far as what he would like to see accomplished during his term, and things like that. And then he is also sort of as the head of the state, is representative in a sort, along with the other 49 governors. So similar responsibilities. He can also, like, as far as military, he can call out the National Guard, like if there's a state of emergency or something like that. But that's about all the military type of power he has. But yeah, so they're similar. They're the head of the executive branch, the same way the president's the head of the executive branch at the federal level. So 2 is C, governors. And 3, what is the sequester? Why now? Tracy, could you maybe read the first?
Yes. What is the sequester? Why now? February 2013. In the last few years, President Obama and both parties in Congress have worked together to reduce our deficit by more than $2.5 trillion through a combination of spending cuts and increased tax rates. In 2011, Congress passed a law saying that if they couldn't agree on a plan to reduce our deficit by $4 trillion, including the $2.5 trillion in deficit reduction, lawmakers in both parties have already accomplished over the last few years about $1 trillion in automatic, arbitrary, and across the broad budget cuts could start to take effect in 2013. Unfortunately, Congress has compromised, and as a consequence, harmful cuts known as a sequester begin March the 1st. These cuts will jeopardize our military readiness and eviscerate job creating investment in education to energy and medical research, and don't take into account whether they eliminate some bloated program that has outlived its usefulness or cut a vital service that Americans depend on every single day. The whole design of these arbitrary cuts was to make them so unattractive and unappealing that Democrats and Republicans would actually get together and find a good compromise of sensible cuts as well as closing tax loopholes and so forth. And so this were all decided to say we can't do this because let's do something smarter. That were a whole point on this so-called sequestration. Sequestration. The question?
Just a sec. I want to mention something here. So yeah, sequestration. It's a great word. And what we have here. So this is from whitehouse.gov. Okay. So again, going back to that same White House, the official website of the White House, kind of the official website of the president to some degree. So the first the 4 paragraphs are just, if you went to the site in 2013, you would have seen, this text. The very last part, this part that's in quotes, the last paragraph in quotes, is a quote from President Obama. So just, those words right there at the end are his words. Now, again, we're talking about so just a little bit on sequestration. When there's budget issues and there's concern all of a sudden about the deficit and debt spending and things in government, if they don't pass a budget and continue to fund certain things, then it's called a sequestration to basically interrupt those services and shut them down until they receive additional funding. So I remember this back in 2013. So only certain like emergency or very bare minimum parts of the government were operating because the rest were not getting funded. And it's so what President Obama is saying here is that it should prompt Democrats and Republicans to work together to solve that issue. Sometimes parties will use that as sort of a weapon to sort of hurt the other party. It's like, okay, well, we're having, budget difficulties, we're having spending difficulties, we're just going to let the government shut down. And you may have heard this from time to time. A government shutdown is usually a sequestration where they don't approve funding for those things, and so it'll, and what he's saying here is that it affects a lot of jobs. People are employed by the government. There's also, people not receiving benefits and things like that because the government shuts down. So just want to give you a little background on what they're talking about here. So then question 3, Grace, you want to read question 3?
Yes. Which of the following generalization can be made based on the information in the budget? A. Many government programs cost too much money and have outlived their usefulness. B. Only government service that Americans depend on every day should not be cut. C. Democrats and Republicans are often forced to compromise. D. The plan for sequestration were agreed on by everyone in Congress. A.
So C.
C.
Yeah, you can you can generalize that it, and that's basically what happens. So Democrats and Republicans are often forced to compromise. Whenever the government shuts down like that, and it jeopardizes, paychecks and benefits and things like that, it frustrates everybody, not just, Democrats, not just Republicans. And when that happens, there's pressure from the public to get this solved. And that is going to require both Republicans and Democrats to do that. So it puts it puts a lot of pressure on them from the public to get, the issue solved, and they are forced to compromise to make sure that, the government starts, functioning again. So it's basically, a large government shutdown. So yeah, 3 is C as in cat. And let's see here. So we got another new reading. Sasha Gay, you want to read the first 2 paragraphs there?
Okay. As stated in Article 2, Section 4 of the Constitution of the United States, the President, Vice President, and all civil officers of the United States shall be removed from office on impeachment for a conviction of treason, bribery, or other high crimes and misdemeanors. The sole power of impeachment lies with the House of Representatives. The Constitution does not set forth exactly how this is done, but historically, the House issues a resolution authorizing the Judiciary Committee to investigate charges. If this committee supports the charges, it issues an impeachment resolution, which includes articles of impeachment. The House of Representatives then discusses and votes on the articles of impeachment. A majority vote on any of the articles is considered impeachment by the House.
Okay, Christiana, you want to finish off there, the last paragraph?
Okay. The Senate has the sole power to try all impeachments according to Article 1, Section 3 of the U.S. Constitution. During the trial, members of the House act as prosecutors, and the full Senate act as a jury. Act as a jury. The senators meet in a closed section to discuss a verdict. A vote is taken in open section on each article of impeachment. If 2/3 of the Senate votes in favor of conviction, the official is impeached. The official is please, what's that word? The
Let's see.
official is
Acquitted. Acquitted.
Yeah. Okay. Acquitted if no article of impeachment is approved by 2/3 of the Senate. To date, no president or vice president of the United States has ever been impeached by the Senate.
Okay, I want to mention something here because I don't care for the way they word this a little bit. So we have had 3 presidents in the history of the United States be impeached. Andrew Johnson, who replaced Abraham Lincoln. We talked about that a while back because of some of his leniency towards the South. That triggered his impeachment. Bill Clinton in 1998, I think. And then Donald Trump was impeached twice. I don't like this last phrase where it says no president or vice president of the United States has ever been impeached by the Senate. So once Congress starts an impeachment process, you are impeached. We will always refer to Donald Trump and Bill Clinton and Andrew Johnson as being impeached. There's not necessarily further impeachment that occurs. For them to be convicted and removed from office, it takes 2/3 vote from the Senate. So I had a little problem with the way they're wording that you are continued to be impeached once that process starts, you are under impeachment. It's up to the Senate to convict you. And this is why we've never had a president removed from office, because typically when that's occurred, the majority of senators have been the party of the president. So it's been real iffy here lately because we have such a close, almost a 50-50 split in the Senate. But you'd have to have that 2/3 of the Senate to do that, and you just don't get enough votes because there's typically going to be too many senators who are going to side with the president on that issue. And the only other case was with Richard Nixon, who was staring at impeachment, and he resigned before he could be impeached. That may have been one that may have turned out different. He may have been removed from office, but of course we'll never know. Just want to kind of point that out there. So for 4, Tracy, go ahead and read 4, the question for us.
Yes. What evidence from the passage supports the following generalization on the officers who have been impeached by the House of Representatives have been acquitted by the Senate? A. Today, no president or vice president had been impeached by the Senate. B. A vote is taken in open session to each article of impeachment. C. The sole power of impeachment lies with the House of Representatives. D. The Senate discuss and vote on the impeachment at the same time as the House of Representatives. D.
So it's A, and that's why I was kind of pointing this out. That I don't really like the way it's worded and everything. But yeah, to date, no president or vice president has been impeached by the Senate. So it should say no president or vice president has received 2/3 vote by the Senate. That would be a little more accurate. So this is kind of generalizing, but the thing that it's saying there, what more to the point, what we want to make sure we understand is that it uses that word all, right? All of the officers who have been impeached by the House of Representatives have been acquitted by the Senate. And the evidence for that is where it says to date, no president or vice president has been impeached by the Senate. I would much prefer if it said has not received a 2/3 vote by the Senate. That's the point I'm making. Okay, so yeah, so 4 is A. We have a little writing exercise here. So always when we get to a writing exercise, want to read the question first so we know how to answer. We look for the evidence we need as we're reading. So the question for number 5, identify a generalization made in the passage about the federal government's current use of technology. In your response, develop an argument to support the generalization with evidence from the passage that reflects the enduring issue of digital government. Incorporate relevant and specific evidence from the passage and from your own knowledge of the issue and the circumstances surrounding the issue to support your generalization. So we want to develop an argument to support the generalization with evidence from the passage that reflects the issue of digital government. Okay, so let's take a look here. I'm going to read through it. So look for generalizations, look for what the main idea is here, and what we can put together. First and foremost, right, we look at the title, From Digital Government, Building a 21st Century Platform to Better Serve the American People. So today's amazing mix of cloud computing ever smarter mobile devices and collaboration tools is changing the consumer landscape and bleeding into government as both an opportunity and a challenge. New expectations require the federal government to be ready to deliver and receive digital information and services anytime, anywhere, and on any device. It must do so safely, securely, and with fewer resources. To build for the future, the federal government needs a digital strategy that embraces the opportunity to innovate more with less and enables entrepreneurs to better leverage government data to improve the quality of services to the American people. Building for the future requires us to think beyond programmatic lines. To keep up with the pace of change in technology, we need to securely architect our systems for interoperability and openness from conception. We need to have common standards and more rapidly share that should be lessons, not lesions, should rapidly share the lessons learned by early adopters. We need to produce better content and data and present it through multiple channels in a program and device agnostic way. We need to adopt a coordinated approach to ensure privacy and security in a digital age. These imperatives are not new, but many of the solutions are. We can use modern tools and technology to seize the digital opportunity and fundamentally change how the federal government serves both its internal and external customers, building a 21st century platform to better serve the American people. And again, looking at whitehouse.gov, and you can tell, how old some of this stuff is. This obviously was all published around 2014 or so, because everything we've accessed is around 2013. So thinking again about the question, right? Identify a generalization made in the passage about the federal government's current use of technology. And then in our response, we need to develop an argument to support the generalization with evidence from the passage that reflects the enduring issue of digital government. So incorporate relevant specific evidence from the passage. Okay. So what we're seeing, the generalization that we can make here is that the federal government is falling behind in the use of technology. That's the generalization that we can make. So we'll go ahead and type that out. The federal government is falling behind in their, well, I'm gonna say in their, yeah, we'll say use of technology. So, I am not spelling well today. Okay. Then so what we're seeing is so what's causing that? And what you get, a lot of this comes from that second paragraph. So we want to look at that second paragraph and determine, what is it that's causing the sort of issues in the federal government as far as adopting technology and using technology. So to keep up with the pace of technology, we need to securely architect our systems for interoperability and openness from conception. Those are really fancy words. And it says we need to have common standards and more rapidly share the lessons learned by early adopters. We need to produce better content and data and present it through multiple channels in a program and a device, another one that's just too much, device agnostic. So, if you're, what it's trying to say there is not identifying with any particular device. This is going to work across all devices, right? That's a weird way to put it, but that's what it's saying there. And we need to adopt a coordinated approach to ensure privacy and security in a digital age. So the federal government is falling behind in their use of technology. The work on innovating or innovation is not cooperative. Right? That's kind of the point they're making there, that they need this technology to be shared and information to be shared. What is going on right now is not, cross platforms. It's specific to devices. We need it to be more open and sharing, is the argument that they're making there. So the work on innovation is not cooperative. In order for better technology innovation to occur, innovation to occur in the United States. And let's take a look here how I can word this. There will need to be more sharing of information and data. Okay. So, identify generalization made in the passage. Largely, the federal government is falling behind in their use of technology. The work on innovation is not cooperative. In order for better technology innovation to occur in the United States, which really speaks to that second paragraph again, there needs to be, largely that's what this is arguing, right? That there needs to be more sharing of information and data. Does that make sense to everybody, what we're doing here?
Yes, it does.
Okay. Everybody able to copy that down? I'll come back to it if we need to follow up. And then we only have 2 questions left here. Let's see, is it on the same? Okay, 2 different passages. Let's go.
Sorry, could you copy some the basic? Yeah, I think the test, because I have a problem when I switch to screen from the workbook and the Zoom. So I should take time to type in again. So could you test copy the test to pass on the chat box?
On like, do you mean like on Google Classroom or just?
Probably on here.
Yeah.
You want me to copy that and paste it into Google Classroom? I can do that. Yeah, I can do that.
Yeah.
Actually, you know what? I will.
Yeah,
do it right now, and then I'll edit it later. But I already have some of my stuff in here for that. All right, then I'll make it.
Or you can copy and pass on the chat to everyone, and they can copy and pass on the.
Oh.
Yeah.
Okay, I see what you're saying. That'd make it a lot easier, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
Okay, there it is, on its way. Good call, Tracy. I never even thought about that. That would be so much easier. I'm glad you brought that up. All right, does
Yes.
everybody see it in the chat there?
Yes. Thank you so
Okay,
much.
okay, awesome. It will be on Google Classroom though, just so. But actually, that might help some other people if they're not in class and they see it. So, right on. Okay. All right. So we'll go ahead and move on then. I think we got that caught up. Let's start. Grace, can you read the first paragraph there for constitutional amendment process?
Okay. From the constitutional amendment process, National Archives and Records Administration. The Constitution provides that an amendment may be proposed either by the Congress with a two-thirds majority vote in both the House of Representatives and the Senate, or by a constitutional convention called for by two-thirds of the state legislatures. Jeremiah. None of the 27 amendments to the Constitution have been proposed by Constitutional Convention. The Congress proposes an amendment in the form of a joint resolution. Since the President does not have a constitutional role in the amendment process, the joint resolution does not go to the White House for signature or approval. The original document is forwarded directly to NARAS, that's the National Archives and Records Administration, Office of the Federal Register, for processing and publication. The OFR adds legislative history notes to the joint resolution and publishes it. The OFR also assembles an information package for the states which includes copies of the joint resolution and the statutory procedure for ratification under 1 USC 106B.
Okay, thanks. Sasha Gay, you want to finish with the next paragraph there?
Okay. The archivist submits the proposed amendment to the state for their consideration by sending a letter of notification to each governor, along with the informational material prepared by the OFR. The governors then formally submit the amendment to their state legislatures. In the past, some state legislatures have not waited to receive official notice before taking action on a proposed amendment. When a state ratifies a proposed amendment, it sends the archivist an original or certified copy of the state action, which is immediately conveyed to the director of the Federal Register. The OFR examines ratification documents for facial, legal sufficiency, and an authenticating signature. If the documents are found to be in good order, the director acknowledges receipt and maintains custody of them. The OFR retains these documents until an amendment is adopted or fails, and then transfers the record to the National Archives for presentation, for preservation. Sorry.
Okay. So and another, that's from archives.gov. So that's the National Archives and Record Administration. And so here's something interesting. Remember we talked about the 20th Amendment and the installation of term limits for the president, right? We're talking about Franklin Roosevelt, who was reelected 3 times, right? He was elected president 4 times, and of course died shortly after his last election in 1944. So at that time, traditionally, there's that word, generalization, traditionally, the president had served 2 terms or no more than 2 terms. It depended on if they were reelected, obviously. But we get to Roosevelt and he decides, I want to keep running. I want to break tradition. And then after that, there was an amendment proposed to limit the president to 2 terms. So you might be wondering, it's like, well, if it was an amendment, wouldn't the president veto that, right? Why would a president allow himself to, limit his terms? Presidents do not sign amendments. They're ratified by the states. It's a different process. So it bypasses the office of the president. It doesn't land on his desk the way other legislation gets vetoed because it's ratified by the states. And then once it's ratified by the states, it becomes law. So what we're actually looking at here is how it's basically reaches the archives and it's basically becomes an amendment at that point. So something to think about when it comes to an amendment. Amendments do not require a veto. They do not require a signature by the president. Sometimes we see some like sort of like a ceremony where the president sort of approves it, but it's not necessary for him to sign anything when it comes to an amendment. Just want to point that out. So number 6, Christiana, you want to read question 6 for us?
The question 7 says, which of the following is a valid generalization about proposed amendment based on the information in the passage? A. Constitutional amendments are typically proposed by Congress. C. State legislature usually do not take action on a proposed amendment before they have received official notice. C. The president is generally involved in the amendment process. D. Most amendments commonly ratified by the state legislatures. Is it A?
Yeah, constitutional amendments are typically proposed by Congress. States can propose it through a constitutional convention, but that's a whole process and that hasn't occurred. But states can propose amendments. And if you look at every one of these statements, they all use generalization language, right? Words. So constitutional amendments are typically is that type of generalization signal word. State legislatures usually do not take action on a proposed amendment. Usually is another one of those signal words. The president is generally involved in the amendment process, generally, very much so, a generalization word. And then most amendments commonly, so commonly, generally, usually, typically, right? Those are the words that you're looking for. In this case, you have to kind of think about what you read and see that, okay, what we're dealing with here is that what it's saying, they have typically been proposed by Congress. That is a accurate generalization. So A for number 6. And I'll finish out here with the last passage. So from statutory authority, the U.S. Department of Justice. In 1870, after the post-Civil War increase in the amount of litigation involving the United States necessitated the very expensive retention of a large number of private attorneys to handle the workload. A concerned Congress passed the act to establish the Department of Justice. I think it's chapter 150, 16, stat 162, bunch of Department of Justice jargon, 1870. setting it up as an executive department of the government of the United States with the Attorney General as its head. Officially coming into existence on July 1st, 1870, the Department of Justice, pursuant to the 1870 Act, was to handle the legal business of the United States. The act gave the department control over all criminal prosecutions and civil suits in which the United States had an interest. In addition, the act gave the Attorney General and the department control over federal law enforcement. To assist the Attorney General, the 1870 Act created the Office of the Solicitor General. And we'll also hear the Attorney General of the United States, which is a cabinet level position, the chief law enforcement officer of the United States, right? Because they oversee like the federal law enforcement. And that whole department, the Department of Justice, was created, well after the Civil War in 1870. All right, so number 7, what evidence from the passage refutes this faulty generalization? So this is an inaccurate statement. What evidence is going to refute that? The United States government is involved in all court cases at entry level. A, it is expensive to hire private attorneys to handle government business. B, the Department of Justice is an executive department of the U.S. government. C, the Department of Justice is involved only in suits in which the United States has an interest. D, the Attorney General and Department of Justice have control over federal law enforcement.
Is it D?
It's C. The Department of Justice is involved only in suits in which the United States has an interest. So in all other cases, they're not involved in somebody locally robs a convenience store, right? The U.S. government doesn't get involved in that. Only if it's in the interest of the United States will they get involved in a court case. Okay, so keep that in mind, part of our civics there. So yeah, 7 is C. Okay. Does anybody need any answers there? Go ahead and stop.